Bennett. I lived in Trenton Township for 36 years. I consider Trenton my hometown, and I became fascinated with Trenton history when I read about the history of science that they used to have there. And I just kind of expanded on knowledge of the area. From my way. And I'm sure that there are probably many people here that know much more about Trenton history than I do. And at the end, if people want to offer their experiences or information, I would be more than happy to entertain them. As you know, we're being hosted by the New York County Heritage Trust and sponsored by Kathleen and few acknowledgments. I want to thank Pat White for the invitation to offer this presentation to the New York County Heritage Trust. Also, earlier researchers, and we're living in summer month. But Ron Young, Sergeant Francis Salzman, Pat Ross, Charles Tillman, and also the Heritage Trust here has an incredible archive selection, particularly regarding Trenton, and this is where I would be without the information of the great. Well, Trenton, in the beginning, the first settlement was built out of the town of Trenton itself. And that was in 1835, and Isaac Jordan is usually considered the very first settlement. Later that year, Mike Crane came out. He actually laid out the village and called it Lancaster after the city of Pennsylvania. The fall of that year, Abraham Updegraff, James and Joseph Green arrived. And then the next year, actually the county of Henry was created as well as the Trenton Township. The following year, other well-known people, Samuel Brazelton, a reporter, George Miller, brought out the Crane's interest and renamed the town Trenton after the city in New Jersey. Later that year, my parents came. I know Jeff is an ancestor of that group. Oh, yes. Along with Jackson, Kephart, and Kurtz arrived. And the next year, many other people came that are names and last names are familiar with the area, including the Morsons, Absalom, Newford, the Jays, Lees, Blacks, Calendars, and so forth. First post office was organized in 1839, and it remained as a result. Well, what on the topic on this fellow here, George Miller. Fascinating fellow. I find him very fascinating. This is the marriage record on the record records of his parents, and George and Mary. And this is the typical record of a Quaker wedding. We have a number of these at the Wetland Museum in Salem as well. I'm going to highlight this right here. George Miller, son of George and Mary Miller, was born about 7 o'clock in the evening on the 30th day of the 10th month, 1797. The second day of the week. The later record, a little after 1806, again, the Quaker records, there was the birth of Phoebe, daughter George, and his wife. And then list a number of the children born up to that time. And here's our George Miller again, his birthday, birth year of 1797. So a little bit about him. He, his father belonged to Quaker, and he had a great sense of social justice. They were opposed to slavery, and apparently the Miller family, dating back a number of generations who lived in that area, had those same feelings. Where education, reading was very important to him, and he kind of instilled those interests in his son. Well, when George was 23, he decided to take a 600-mile walk from the and he went to York City, mid part of the state, along the Hudson River, and he took a steamboat again, not too quick from the records that I read, which is dated from 1870, is that this was the first steamboat that actually went, I think, Lake Erie. He then, after that, continued on foot to Ohio and then started his return back to home, 600 miles. Then he further traveled, before becoming Iowa 15 years later, of course, and he went to Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and for a short time settled along the Vermilion River in Illinois. He later traveled on both sides of the Mississippi River all the way up to Perry County. Somewhere along the line, he ended up buying land in Henry County. He heard that was very fertile soil, virgin soil, tall grass prairie, forest, wildlife. He crossed over from Illinois and Iowa, town Burlington, and then settled here. And he never married. Going back to the time after his long trek, but before he came to Iowa, he and 4 other friends decided to start their own Institute of Science. And this was in Delaware County. So this John Payton, actually, one of his friends, became a world famous ornithologist. Mr. Cambridge, George Smith, and John Miller. So they actually got together over multiple meetings. They established the makeup and organization of this. It actually was built and then kind of opened between 1836 and 1837. Of note, again, left in 1835 to kind of travel out west. That institute had several thousands of books and publications interested in natural sciences, local history exhibits of mountain animals, birds, fossils, shells, and minerals. This is actually a contemporary picture inside that museum, and you can see many of the things that I talked about. But these sorts of things were important to him, and he brought that as interest with him when he came to Trenton. So he came in 1837. By the 1850 census, he is listed here. Of note, Joel Turney is his neighbor right here. Occupation of a farmer, and he was worth $7,000, which was a lot of money back in 1850. 10 years later, he actually had a net worth of $20,000. Put that in perspective, that it's just shy of $1 million today. And how he made all the money, I can only speculate, but it was through farming. He bought a lot of property when he first got here. He sold property, but I can't find any hard data. So maybe if there's some Miller scholars that can tell us later. So that was 1860. Now in 1870, these beautiful atlas books that get published. This is an excerpt from the Trenton Township. So we have Trenton here. Notice George Miller has property all around here. James Green has property here. He was one of the first settlers a couple years before George Miller arrived. And this is Elk Grove Farm. This is a schematic of that farm in that atlas book. It's a nice house, but it's a modest house. It's where the Wilson's property has right now. Is where this would be, and I think that the Miller's house would be in front of that. And I believe that the Miller's house used to belong to George Miller property. So this brings us to the Henry County Institute of Science. So George wanted to duplicate what he had done many years ago in Pennsylvania, and he built this institute. It was, the mason was Mr. Stowe, S-T-O-U-T-H, so it's listed in the paper. He built this, cost him $5,000, $6,000. He paid it all out of his own pocket. And this is a press release in August of 1869. It opened in 1870. So Mr. George Miller, he's building the fine brick edifice, which he proposes to give to the township. The name of it, the Scientific Academy. It will have a hall on the top floor. Beside the fine library will occupy a portion of the building. It will be a fine building and very generous with Mr. Miller giving his wealth to such a generous and beneficial object. And this Mr. Stowe was the mason of this city. This was not. This is a bit long, but I do want to read this. This is a few years after it opened. Mr. Miller owned the land, living contiguous to the village. At his own expense, it cost of $5,000 built this edifice, library, museum, three stories hall, large basement, library in the upper story, and 700 volumes of books at that time, besides public documents, both state and national. The object was to promote knowledge of the arts and sciences, literature, diffusion of general knowledge among the people. When the building was completed, the society was immediately organized to carry out this object because he died just before it opened. The society had as many as 80 individuals. They had an annual income of $150 to $200 a year. In my research, I found that 3-page letter, handwritten, this is just the first page, signed by George Miller in August of 1869, and I want to read it to you, and I transcribed it as it was written, so it doesn't flow particularly well, but it is actually very interesting. It says, to the citizens of Trenton and the public generally, many of you in the building could be intended for some usual use. And I'm not quite sure what they mean by that, but we're a few years away from 1776 with the 100th anniversary. I don't know if that's what he means by a jubilee or not. I know that they were going to have a jubilee to help raise money for chairs and bookcases and so forth. That may have been it as well. Such is the case. I perceived or thought of the necessity of having something to stimulate the youth of our town and the neighborhood. There seems to be a want for something to incite the youth to study the resources of our country with the arts and sciences. I hope that its lecture room and room for library and museum, which shall hold collections of minerals, plants, birds, and small animals. We might have a museum of considerable value. The lecture room once seated, the Jubilee should devise some means to do that. I understand some people fear that I may retain it for my own use. Now, I think I have very little use of the building at that time. It might be good to look at, but it would become stale over the course of time. I have a proposition to offer those who are so very cautious about how the money goes. That each person who furnishes the means to purchase one of those patent seats that will accommodate 5 persons and will cost $6, they can have a lien on that seat at its value. Every person has his own ideas of matters and things. I think it a little preposterous that anyone would require of me to give them the key to the house. By financing one that affords erecting it, that should give him that right. When I resided in the East, I belonged to a literary company. One of our neighbors accommodated us with a room. No one ever thought necessary that he should give us a key for it. George Miller became ill several last months of 1869. So this was only 4 years after the end of the Civil War. So he only had been ill. He became quite ill on Christmas Day, and then he died December 31st. On May 28th of 1870, all his heirs conveyed to the current and subsequent board of the Henry School of Science Building and associated property for a consideration of $1 for its continued use as outlined in the Arts Corporation. So they did not wish it to be sold. They actually gave it to the city and to the community. This is actually the second page of the document, and this lists all of his heirs, the seals, and the front page says in way too many words exactly what I just said. So I just recently found in our collection these books. These are the original minutes from the Institute, starting in 1869 into the latter part of the 1800s. This here is a picture of the first paragraph here. The interesting thing is, so this is days before George Miller died. But they got together for a preliminary meeting, and of interest, the Constitution and bylaws of the Delaware County, Pennsylvania Institute of Science was read. What they decided was that's probably pretty darn good. And we're going to just adopt that for our institute here. Subsequent pages indicates that there's 20 members, there's 5 board members, and so forth. They had a pamphlet which they produced about the Institute of Science. The first page is the preamble, and it's worth reading. So the progress of civilization is calculated to stimulate mankind to increase the exertion and acquisition and diffusion of general knowledge. In no age where a country has ignorance been established honorably. On the contrary, in order to increase and systemize information has ever been deemed minimal. So forth. So I just find it fascinating that in a town of less than 200 people even at the time, as somebody would build an institute to increase your knowledge. Today we have so many, we have our phones, we have TV, so many things for distraction. I didn't realize they did not have those things then, and probably people were starving for information, learn what's going on around in the world. So here's some interesting facts that I learned. On entering the building, from the front, one's led through a ballroom to a hall with a broad staircase running up to the grand library room. The room contains books, cases of specimens and curiosities, hanging portraits, statuary tables, and chairs. Here we have a number of books that are from the library. Inside there's a nameplate. I'll show you an example of that. And I think Kathy is what very important. Apparently, family member nicked that when the building was kind of falling apart before they ended up. I would ask if you would. Is it turned on? Switching back. How's that? Can you do? Yep. Turn it up. Turn the volume up. Put the mic closer to the mouth. Like that? Yeah. Please listen. Okay. All right. Well, the ballroom was used as an auditorium for social gatherings. They had voting happen there. They would have ice cream socials. They would have dances. When they would have to have a meeting of the community, they would have it there. If people wanted to rent it for a special occasion, they could do that. The Organization of Odd Fellows rented space there to have their meetings. As I mentioned earlier, it's controlled by 15 or 5 directors. At 1879, they had little over 1,000 volumes eventually. He went over 1,700 volumes. Annual meetings was held on George Miller's birthday. Here's the only picture I can find of the interior. This is from an article by Melvin Gingrich. Now you can see there's a picture of George here. Piano, table, bookcase, and statuary. And there's actually one of the actual bookcases that was in the Institute. This is from a nurse that I worked with in Iowa City, and she said, "You live near Trenton, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, do you know anything about the Institute of Science?" And I said, "Well, I heard about it. But I have a bookcase that used to belong in it." And I said, "Well, can you send me a picture?" So that is what one of the bookcases that the Institute used to look like. This is a fascinating invoice. So this actually, when they got statuary, so they have bust of Shakespeare, Ben Franklin, Daniel Webster, Lord Byron, Dickens, Burns. You can get all of those for $17. That's it. And those you saw up in the top of the list. Other thing is these books, a lot of them were purchased from the government wards. This is an invoice of the books. They were shipped to the secretary, was at Montgomery. On the back side of this, they had advertisement of different things you could buy from the government wards. This is a close-up of another. It's interesting, some of the titles: Bob, Son of Battle, like the Warren of Menace, Practical Farming and Gardening, Conquest. There's quite a collection of fiction, nonfiction, and so forth. In book over here, this is actually January 1st. It says, I think it's 1876. Each number of what book number 1 was pornography. And chronology is law. So they just, rather than when people check out books, they can just put the number, and you can check out 2 books at a time. Some people check out as many as 40 books a year. But it's not fascinating. Look at the different titles of books. This is one of the I consider one of my great finds. And this has to do with Senator Carter. So we had a representative in town last name Pickle, and there is a relationship with him with the Pickle Church by New London. And so Mr. Pickle asked Senator Harnick if he could lend or give some books to the library, and he complied. And it's interesting, either agricultural report from 1866 through 69, mechanical reports, 66, 67, 68. Anyway, 15 volumes with signed James Harding. And he was in Washington, so his date for his address of the book was in Washington, D.C. in April of 1871. This is a typical book plate. Library of Henry County Institute of Science. The number of the book, which would correspond to what's written in the ledger book here. So there are educational programs, and I found this card, which gives programs from 1905, and it looks like it breaks up into different grades or groups, different times of the day. But physics, drawing, civics, literature, arithmetic, history, physiology, geography, really a whole spectrum of information to learn. I know that Professor Haven was from a music school in Kiev. Never couldn't find out who Professor Williams was. So Anne Montgomery was the secretary for many years. And the interesting thing, to become a member, you had to be nominated by two other members that were in good standing. So you would get this. It says, I recommend Arthur Williams. He's a suitable person. Become a member, and it's signed by people who indicated they represented. And this is a typical log of what the expenses might be. And this some expenses from July through the end of the year. So we have the Iowa iFellows meetings, $24. Woodland of the World, I think, WOW. Well, that's Woodland. The institute itself, elections, trustees, and we have special meetings and so forth. This was actually for janitorial. The janitor would get paid. So Melvin Gingrich wrote to when he was writing this article for the columnist on the Institute, he wrote to Mrs. Morrison. He said, I understand that you were a librarian at the Institute. Can you tell me a little bit about it? And she wrote, I was the librarian at Trenton Institute of Science, beginning in 1890 through 1902. And as near as I can remember, years ago, I helped to keep it going. Decline in membership and lack of funds helped to cause the decline. The building was donated in the early 60s, and I'm not sure who it was donated to. The city, maybe, Trenton itself. So when it opened in 1869, 1870, there were 24 members. It reached its peak just 4 years later at 79. But 20 years later, down to 37. 10 years after that, 7 up to 30. But by 1936, there were only 3 people who were paying dues. And then during the last few years, they had no librarian. And the remaining members kept the records and paid insurance. Here's some pictures of the building in its disrepair. I never saw the building. I understand it was raised in the 1970s. I'm not right. But just seeing some of the, the beautiful brickwork, cornices, and so forth. I think it must have been a beautiful building. So next fellow I'd like to talk about is Joel Turney. In the 1850 census, he was listed right next to Mr. Miller. So he was raised in Ohio, born in 1827, and he settled in Trenton. And I don't know what route he took to Trenton, but there were a number of fairly well-traveled roads. But he established a temporary blacksmith shop to repair wagons as they were crossing the frontier to go further west. But he found that his business picked up quite a bit during the California Gold Rush. So he just decided to stay there, repairing wagons, which required both woodworking and metalworking. But after the travel for the Gold Rush and the Gold, he ended up building his dedicated woodworking shop and started to build complete wagons. He married Sarah Morrison. He was one of the, very early, her parents were one of the very early people that arrived. Unfortunately, she died just 2 years after marriage, and they had no children. He subsequently married her parent, 5 children, 2 died, and the 3 survived him. Found that the Civil War actually increased the demand for war wagons, and later established the Joel Turney and Sons Charter of Wagon Works. This is a schematic from 1870 of Trenton, flat map of the square. This here is a forge. So where the feed mill was, is where the wagon works was. This attorney lived in this house right here. This is the only picture that I know of I've been able to find of the shop in Trenton. This was in a newspaper. It was in Wayland Winfield paper back in the 50s. So Fred and Arthur Schworm, I assume that these two individuals are the Schworms. Fred was big Fred. And it's interesting to see at its peak, they had like about 9 people that were working in the shop. I mean, this is a fairly young person. 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's about 8 or 9 people. So it's probably one of the maximum production at the time. An example of one of his wagons. This was sold in West Liberty. In 1879, there was a huge fire at night, and basically it was just completely demolished. The value of everything was about $5,000. He did not have insurance. But I found later that he built it. And it was around this time that he was getting too strong, but he was very encouraged by Fairfield to move all of his productions to Fairfield. So that he decided to stay here for right now. His hope was that a railroad would come to Trenton and he would be able to get supplies and ship out much more easily than had done. So he got a wood shop, which was 2,500, and a paint shop, separate paint shop, was powered by a steam engine. And there are many equipment that people that would understand. Shapers and joiners and dowel machines and outdooring, bandsaws, and so forth. Of note, the blacksmith shop walls were filled with sawdust in the winter. And you wonder why they burned down. Brick walls filled with sawdust and spark from furnace. Anyway, the note here, he had a recent trip in St. Louis. He purchased 6 railroad cars load of both yellow pine and poplar. And by 1887, he was building about 400 or 500 wagons per year. This was a salesman's sign for their charter for wagons. This is actually, and you can see Trenton, Iowa, and it's been covered up by the name Fairfield. But this was his logo while he was in Trenton. And this is the Turney Wagon Works in Fairfield, which also comes with water. I'm going to talk a little bit about the schools of Trenton. This is an article from the Free Press of 1876. The township is divided into 8 school districts, all of which have good schoolhouses and schools at the present time, in running order. No township in the county pays higher wages to its teachers than the county. It goes on to mention about, the churches control. Take care earlier. This is not a picture of the first school. The first school was a log school, and it was on the southwest corner, and built in 1838, 1840. So this within 5 years of that in the area. Apparently, it cost about $100. Reference. The second school was a brick house. And it was built in 1868 at a cost of $6,000. So this is just 1 year before the Trenton Institute was built. So, lovely brick school, lovely brick institute. Eager young students. So the Mr. and Mrs. M.D.K. Weaver were the principal and teachers. And the interesting thing about this, and Charles Zillman put behind this, is that he decided to go prospecting up in Alaska. He, along with Professor Ed DeBarnwell from Wayland, principal at Wayland, Dan Sweeter, Mike Hoffenstein, and Dr. Jones from Wayland, organized a group company called the Henry County Prospecting and Mining Company. And they went up to the Klondike. They actually got to Washington, got a boat all the way up to Alaska, and then over to the top. This was the cover of that book. You could buy it for $200. One of his other people that went with him also wrote a book. It is in the historical room at the city library, and lots of pictures. Absolutely fascinating. Last school built was in 1899. And I don't know why after a short time the brick building was replaced. I had a couple of pictures of school kids. This is a summer picture, even little dog and there. We have like a winter picture, but nice playground. The kids look happy. Everyone was happy to be outside and not studying. And if anybody ever has one pictures like this, I'll let them see it. So these are some of the recollections of Rudy, Pam Rudy, and Glenn Wilson. So there was grades 1 through 8. 2 stories, one classroom upstairs and one downstairs. The first floor was also used as a community center. The second floor was actually used by Boy Scouts. Mark, look where the Boy Scouts started,
It was Mr. Powell and they go.
Well, obviously it was, back part, turn of the century or someplace shortly after that. We had about 100 students, and they would go off about 2 miles in all directions. Classes were from 9 to 4. Some of the teachers were Fanny Whitaker, Rose and Annie Bennett, all know them as the A little bit about the church, or the churches. The Trenton Methodist Church timeline. This is information I received from Charlotte. So George Miller sold 2 lots to the local Presbyterians in 1845 for $10. Presbyterians built the church. It was apparently the first reorganization a few years later. But in 1893, the Methodist Episcopal Church was founded, and then they purchased the building from the Presbyterian Synod for $75. They had extensive remodeling in 1950 to the tune of $3,000. And it merged with the Evangelical United Brethren to form the United Methodist Church. In 1999 was that when there was the Fellowship Hall model. And then this 15 years ago, the new Sunrise River, which is beautiful. This had to be explained to me. This is the church, but this is looking from west to east. Now we come into the church from the north. So this has changed. Where the spire here is now on the side, and you have the entrance going in this way. If you see this, the gabled building there going east-west or west-east. Jeff, is that right? Is that about right? The Trenton Missionary Church, I found one picture before it was remodeled. And this apparently was built originally in 1902 by Roy Martin. And then, there was some minor changes to the naming of the church in 1937. This is one of my favorite pictures because it's right across the street from where I live. But it's the Richwoods Benjamin Chapel. As you know, a country block south was the original chapel. That's where the old cemetery was. And that was destroyed by the Grinnell tornado in 1882. And then it got relocated. And the cemetery was started there. Early picture, because you can see all the horses and buggies. And just to the left of the church is a cedar tree, and that cedar tree is still there. So the old picture I found with snow. And then we have the Green Mountain Church. Was it last year or the year before? It celebrated their 180th anniversary. I found this a neat picture of it on Find a Grave, where you're in the cemetery, kind of looking over the road. Some of the entertainment in town. We did have a baseball team. This underneath is the Miller home, which is across from Star Service. Beautifully maintained home. This is what the uniforms used to look like. At the ice cream social last August, they had this on the wall, and I took a picture of it. So the black and white picture doesn't really give it justice. These are the names that are written on the back here. So there may be some ancestors of people in the audience now. And some I couldn't make out where there was question mark, where there was a question mark on the back, and the people who voted didn't know. They did have a restaurant in town. It says pop there. I don't know if you're named soda pop or population, and we don't have the number after it. There was the Felder Brothers store, destroyed by a fire in the 1900s, and Mr. Felder was hired on the director's side there. The original Pulford Journal store, and then later the modern Pulford store that many of you remember. Jim Widmer telling me about his dad after doing deliveries of a home delivery in Trenton around Christmas time. They sold Christmas trees, and he would just grab a tree and take it home, and then go back the next day and pay for it. This was an office home for Dr. Paul, and that was just on the west side, on the northwest side of the square. And I do remember this building that was later taken down. This store was a general store as well as delivery, and later in the site of Miami Gate service station. I think that was the very first service station in Trenton. Pauline Morrison, the post office was in there, and the post office was discontinued in 1915. And this is the Salmon's home, but originally Absalom Leaper's house. And this was, I found on the internet, and was taken in 1962. Absalom Leaper, he's an interesting man. We could go the whole hour just talking about him. But depending on your read, he either was 97 or 107, some number in between when he died. There are articles in the newspaper that said he was the oldest living person in the state of Iowa at one time. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. There are articles, there's information in the newspapers where he was scammed out of some money by people that came through town as well. I like this picture because he reminds me of Dave Miller so much. Oh. Sheep Dave. His face is the Hickey Brothers. So, in conclusion, I just spoke 45 minutes about the little town of Trenton, and I drive through it every single day. You know, you think about things, but it's just one little town. And, you know, you could say it about all the little towns in the community. They all have their stories. They all have their individuals who lived their lives. They had people who were passionate about their community or their family, their spouses, and their sports. And you don't have to do grand things. You just scratch the surface somewhere, lift up the problem. There's a fascinating story if you want to make it for it. So thank you very much, and I can entertain any questions. He came from Pennsylvania, but multiple ancestors that I don't know. But I just know that multiple generations lived in the United States, but who the immigrant Miller was.
And so where I see there,
Green Mountain Cemetery. If you go to find a grave website, you can put his name, Henry County, and it'll pop right up.
But you mentioned the hope for a railroad.
Never happened. It went through not pleasant. An interesting tidbit. I was doing research on William and Cordelia Cole, who lived in the house where Baron Crane's family, the Fred and Ruth Crane. And there was a train that was coming through then. This was like in the 1860s. And he must have been, he published some information that he was supportive of the train coming through town. It did go right by his property, by the way. And then other people said, what an absolute waste of money. We shouldn't be supporting this sort of thing. We don't need it. I don't know what it would be used for. But it was at least between those people, it was controversial at the time. But it was around in 1860 sometime. And I think what Kearney was hoping for was that there would be a spur. And there were spurs that went through Houghton. Spurs that went to all kinds of small little communities, and it just never happened. Anybody else? Any corrections? Things that I misstated that for a fact that was not true. Well, thank you for taking time out of your day to come today. This was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed researching it and presenting it. Thank
you. Before you go, I'd like to introduce John Bennett. We also have some volunteers who are supposed to be showing their faces through there. Karen, Delilah, and Jack. So you can greet them on the way out. They're interested in research, and they've been here this summer. They're learning some of the ropes. Every high school is fall. Say hi to Karen, Delilah, and Jack on the way out. Couple of writers. Next Saturday, Jeremy McLaughlin brings information on Henry County potteries. There was the Melchers, the Becks, the Turleys, maybe some other. This guy knows potteries like your mother knows cookies. Speaking of cookies, there are home-baked cookies every Wednesday at the Mount Pleasant Farmers Market at McMillan Park. Sheila and Mona also have a few historical things from here, books and puzzles and so on. Donations are always welcome. He's good doctor than John Bennett around here. John Bennett, thank you.